To the world, Han Seo-Jin was a finished product. The kind of man journalists love to summarize in a single sentence: cold, brilliant, unreachable. A Korean CEO whose presence alone could silence a room. Someone who never smiled in photographs and never explained himself in interviews. People whispered things about him. That he didn't feel attraction. That he preferred men. That he was incapable of warmth. Seo-Jin never corrected them. Because the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous. What no one understood was that his distance wasn't arrogance. It was armor. Carefully built. Carefully maintained. Because once, a long time ago, feeling had cost him more than he could afford to lose. That lesson came early. Seo-Jin was 8 years old when his mother collapsed at a charity event, smiling politely even as her body failed her. Cameras flashed. Guests gasped. And while others rushed forward in panic, Seo-Jin stood frozen, unsure which reaction was correct. Later that night, his father sat across from him in a quiet study, the air heavy with disappointment. "You didn't cry," his father said calmly. Seo-Jin nodded. "That was good," the man continued. "Emotion clouds judgment. Remember that." From that moment on, affection became something private, controlled, rationed. Love was never forbidden, but it was never encouraged either. And slowly, naturally, Seo-Jin learned to replace warmth with discipline. As he grew older, the system around him tightened. Elite schools. Private tutors. Doctors who spoke in clinical tones about emotional regulation and stability. Every reaction was measured. Every response evaluated. When he showed attachment, it was redirected. When he showed curiosity, it was refined. When he showed longing, it was corrected. By the time Seo-Jin reached adulthood, desire felt theoretical. Something other people spoke about excitedly as though it were universal. He assumed it simply wasn't part of him. And so, when rumors began circulating about his sexuality, his detachment, he didn't bother denying them. Let them believe what they wanted. The invitation to South Africa arrived quietly. An international development conference. Infrastructure investment. A chance to expand his company's footprint into emerging markets. Normally, he would have delegated the trip. But something about the location lingered. Perhaps it was the distance. Perhaps it was the unfamiliarity. Or perhaps, without realizing it, Seo-Jin needed to be somewhere his past couldn't reach him so easily. He approved the trip himself. And with that single decision, everything began to shift. Cape Town greeted him with light. Not the sharp glare of Seoul's glass towers, but something warmer. Softer. The air carried salt and sun and voices that laughed without restraint. Seo-Jin noticed it immediately, and dismissed it just as quickly. He checked into his hotel, reviewed schedules, prepared presentations. Control returned. Familiar. Comforting. Still, that night, as he stood by the window overlooking the city, something unsettled him. For the first time in years he felt aware. Her name was Naledi Mbeki. She wasn't part of his delegation. She wasn't introduced formally. She simply appeared, standing near the back of the conference hall, listening instead of performing, watching instead of speaking. When she finally did speak, her voice carried calm authority. She challenged one of his projections. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Just honestly. And Seo-Jin felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. He told himself it was irritation. He corrected her politely. She countered with data he hadn't seen. The room leaned in. Interest sparked. Seo-Jin won the exchange, but barely. And afterward, instead of satisfaction, he felt unsettled. He noticed the way she met his gaze without flinching. The way she didn't try to impress him. The way she didn't seem afraid of him at all. That disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. They spoke later, over coffee he hadn't planned to drink. Naledi asked questions no one ever asked him. About intention. About consequence. About whether growth always had to come at a cost. He answered carefully. But something about her presence made careful feel insufficient. When they parted, Seo-Jin realized something alarming. He was thinking about her. Seo-Jin told himself it was nothing. That night, as the city settled into a quieter rhythm outside his hotel window, he stood perfectly still, jacket still on, phone untouched in his hand, replaying the afternoon as if it were a presentation slide gone wrong. Naledi's voice. Her questions. The way she hadn't once tried to impress him. He dismissed it the way he dismissed everything unfamiliar, by categorizing it as distraction, fatigue from travel, jet lag, an unfamiliar environment. Yes, that had to be it. Because attraction was not something that happened to him. It was something people talked about in vague, exaggerated terms. And he had long ago accepted that whatever switch activated that feeling in others had simply never existed in him. So he slept. Or at least, he closed his eyes and waited for morning. Morning came too quickly. As Seo-Jin reviewed his notes over breakfast, he noticed something unsettling. His concentration fractured easily. Numbers blurred. Sentences lost their sharpness. And beneath it all, persistent and unwelcome, was a single thought. Will she be there today? The realization irritated him. He had built an empire on control of people's systems' outcomes. Yet here he was, distracted by a woman he had met only once, in a city that meant nothing to his long-term plans. He folded the thought away. But it didn't stay folded. Naledi noticed his absence before she admitted it to herself. She told herself it didn't matter. Men like Seo-Jin passed through conferences all the time, impressive, distant, untouchable. They made their statements and vanished back into the world that protected them. And yet, when she scanned the room that morning and didn't see him, she felt something unexpected settle in her chest. Disappointment. Not because she wanted him, but because she had sensed something unfinished between them. Fate, it seemed, was unimpressed by both of their denials. Their paths crossed again during a breakout session neither had planned to attend. Seo-Jin entered mid-discussion, eyes already calculating exits when he felt it, the shift. Naledi looked up. Their eyes met, and the air between them tightened. There was no smile, no greeting, just recognition, quiet, immediate, undeniable. Seo-Jin took a seat 2 rows behind her. And for the rest of the session, he heard almost nothing that was said. It happened without warning. Someone made a careless joke about foreign investors saving Africa. And before Naledi could stop herself, she laughed short, sharp, unguarded. The sound cut through Seo-Jin with startling force. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't strategic. It was real. His chest tightened and for a moment he forgot where he was. Forgot who he was supposed to be. The sensation unsettled him deeply, because it felt like warmth. Warmth had never been safe. Seo-Jin recognized that immediately. Warmth led to attachment. Attachment led to exposure. And exposure in his world always carried a cost. He shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, mind already building walls. Whatever this was, it needed to stop. That evening, when Naledi approached him near the elevator, he was prepared. Prepared to be distant. Prepared to be polite. Prepared to end whatever had begun before it grew teeth. But she didn't corner him. She didn't flirt. She simply asked, "Did you get the chance to look at the regional housing data I sent?" Professional. Grounded. Calm. And suddenly, his prepared defenses felt unnecessary. They talked. Again. They walked together without deciding to. Through the hotel lobby. Out into the cooling evening air. Past conversations that faded into background noise. At some point their shoulders brushed. The contact was accidental. The reaction was not. Seo-Jin's breath caught sharply, as though something dormant had been startled awake. Heat rushed through him. Fast, overwhelming, unfamiliar. He stepped back immediately. Too fast. Naledi noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. The concern in her voice wasn't invasive. It wasn't curious. It was human. Seo-Jin nodded. Yes. The lie tasted strange on his tongue. Later, alone in his room, Seo-Jin stood under the shower until the water ran cold. He replayed the moment again and again, the brush of skin, the rush of sensation, the fear that followed. No woman had ever made him react like that. Not confusion. Reaction. His hands trembled slightly as he turned off the water. For the first time in his life, he admitted something he had never allowed himself to question. He wasn't incapable of feeling. He had simply never been awakened. With that realization came panic. If this continued, if he allowed himself to feel, everything would unravel. His family, his position, the carefully constructed life that depended on him remaining exactly as he was. Walking away would be safer. But as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, another truth settled in. Walking away might destroy him in a different way. The knock came after midnight. Soft, hesitant. Seo-Jin knew who it was before he reached the door. Naledi stood there, uncertainty written across her face, courage barely steadying her voice. "I thought maybe we should talk," she said. Seo-Jin looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Because in that moment, standing at the edge of something he did not yet understand, he realized. This was no longer a distraction. It was a threshold. And once crossed, there would be no returning to who he had been before. The door closed softly behind Naledi, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The room felt suddenly smaller, as though the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. The city hummed faintly outside the window, but inside, there was only the sound of their breathing, hers steady, his uneven in a way that surprised him. Seo-Jin gestured toward the chair by the window, unsure of what etiquette applied when you invited uncertainty into your private space. Naledi didn't sit immediately. She looked around instead, taking in the immaculate order of the room. "You live like you're never supposed to leave a trace," she said quietly. The observation landed closer to the truth than she could have known. They spoke cautiously at first, like people stepping across thin ice. Naledi talked about her work, about why she chose ethics over profit, about how easily people justified harm when it came wrapped in ambition. Seo-Jin listened, not because he was strategizing, but because he wanted to understand how her mind worked. When she asked about him, he answered selectively. Not lies, but not the whole truth either. Yet even partial honesty felt like exposure. There were things Seo-Jin wanted to say but couldn't shape into words. That her presence made the room feel warmer. That his body reacted to her in ways his mind didn't recognize. That something inside him felt awake and afraid at the same time. Instead, he asked about her childhood. And she answered freely. That alone felt like a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. At some point, conversation slowed. Silence settled. Not awkward but heavy with things unsaid. Naledi stood to leave, sensing the edge of something neither of them had named. "Thank you for listening," she said. She reached for the door. Seo-Jin spoke before he could stop himself. "Stay." The word hung between them, fragile and honest. She turned. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden rush. No force. Just Naledi stepping closer. Slowly enough that Seo-Jin could have retreated if he wanted to. He didn't. Her fingers brushed his wrist again, deliberate this time. The sensation rippled through him, deeper than before, settling somewhere he didn't know how to control. His breath caught, and Naledi saw it. "This is okay?" she asked softly. Seo-Jin searched for the answer. Nothing in his life had prepared him for this question. Not contracts. Not boardrooms. Not discipline. What he felt wasn't hunger alone. It was release. "Yes," he said, the word barely audible. The kiss was hesitant at first, testing, uncertain. But when Naledi felt his body respond, truly respond, something shifted between them. Seo-Jin's hands trembled as he touched her back, as though learning a language his body remembered but his mind had forgotten. Heat spread through him, slow, overwhelming, undeniable. This wasn't theoretical. This was real. And it frightened him. They didn't go further. Not that night. Instead, they stood wrapped in the quiet aftermath of something irreversible. Naledi rested her forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat race beneath her ear. "You feel like someone who's been holding his breath for years," she said. Seo-Jin closed his eyes. He had no answer. Morning light revealed consequences. Seo-Jin woke before dawn, his body heavy with unfamiliar sensation. He reached for his phone instinctively, checking messages, security alerts, schedules. 3 missed calls. 1 from his assistant. 2 from an unlisted number. Something had shifted beyond his control. Naledi noticed it too. The way staff lingered longer than necessary. The way conversations paused when she entered rooms. The way security appeared where it hadn't before. When she mentioned it to Seo-Jin, his expression darkened. Not with anger but recognition. "They're watching," he said. "Not who. Just they." That night, Seo-Jin told her part of the truth. About the expectations placed on him. About the image he was required to maintain. About how deviation had consequences. He didn't mention the doctors. He didn't mention the medication. But Naledi heard what he wasn't saying. You should be careful, he said quietly. Naledi frowned. Careful of what? He hesitated. Of getting close to me. She studied him for a long moment. Too late, she said gently. From that point on, distance was impossible. They didn't hide, but they didn't advertise either. Small moments accumulated. Lingering touches. Shared glances that spoke louder than words. Seo-Jin felt alive. And because of that, exposed. During a closed-door meeting, one board member mentioned Naledi by name. Casually. Too casually. Seo-Jin's stomach tightened. They knew. That evening, an envelope slid under Naledi's hotel door. No return address. Inside, photographs. Her. Him. Moments she didn't know had been watched. The message was clear without words. When Naledi showed Seo-Jin the envelope, his calm fractured. This ends now, he said sharply. Not the relationship. The danger. And for the first time, Naledi saw something beneath his restraint. Rage. That night, Seo-Jin contacted someone he hadn't spoken to in years. A former fixer. Erase her trail, he said. Quietly. There was a pause. And you? The voice asked. Seo-Jin stared out at the city. I'll handle myself. You should go home, he told Naledi the next morning. She searched his face. Is this you protecting me, she asked, or pushing me away? Seo-Jin didn't answer. Because the truth was both. Naledi left that afternoon. Not because she wanted to, but because she understood something had shifted. Seo-Jin watched her car disappear down the street. A hollow forming in his chest that no discipline could quiet. That night, alone again, Seo-Jin acknowledged the truth he could no longer escape. Feeling hadn't weakened him. It had made him vulnerable. And vulnerability in his world always demanded payment. The question was no longer if the cost would come, but how much it would take from him when it did. Distance was supposed to restore order. That was what Seo-Jin told himself as Naledi's absence stretched from hours into days. Yet instead of calm, something restless took root inside him. His routine returned, meetings, reports, decisions worth billions, but none of it settled him. At night, sleep came in fragments. And in those fragments he remembered her voice. It was not longing that unnerved him most. It was his body's betrayal. A warmth that returned without invitation. A tension that had nothing to do with stress. A craving not for touch alone but for closeness. He had never experienced this before. Which meant he had no defenses against it. 3 days after Naledi left, a message arrived. Not from her. From an anonymous number. She didn't go far. Seo-Jin stared at the screen, the room around him fading. This was not a warning. It was a declaration. From that moment, surveillance intensified. His travel routes changed without his authorization. His meetings were suddenly rescheduled. His assistant avoided eye contact. Seo-Jin understood the language of power well. They were not advising him. They were containing him. That night, he allowed himself one indulgence. He replayed the memory of Naledi's presence. Not the kiss alone, but the way she looked at him as though he were human before he was powerful. It unsettled him, because it made him want more. Their reunion was not planned. Naledi stood in the lobby of his hotel, suitcase beside her, expression unreadable. I didn't feel safe leaving like that, she said calmly. Seo-Jin felt something snap. Relief, fear, desire. All at once. They returned to his suite in silence. But it was not the fragile silence of uncertainty. It was heavy, charged with everything they had avoided naming. Seo-Jin closed the door behind them. And for the first time he did not try to control what followed. The kiss this time was not hesitant. It carried days of restraint, fear, and longing compressed into one breathless moment. Seo-Jin's composure dissolved, not violently but completely, as if something deeply locked away had finally been allowed to surface. He touched her like a man learning himself anew. And Naledi did not pull away. Time slowed. They explored connection rather than urgency. Hands tracing, breaths aligning, tension unraveling in waves rather than bursts. This was not reckless passion. It was accumulated emotion finally finding release. For Seo-Jin, it felt like standing in fire and not wanting to escape. Later, wrapped in quiet, Seo-Jin lay awake while Naledi slept beside him. For the first time in his life, peace did not feel empty. It felt dangerous, because now he had something to lose. Morning brought reality with brutal efficiency. Security appeared unannounced. A private board meeting was scheduled within hours. His phone was taken under the guise of protocol. Naledi watched it all unfold, dread settling in her chest. "This is about me," she said. Seo-Jin did not deny it. The boardroom was cold and windowless. Faces he had known for years regarded him with measured disappointment. One voice cut through the silence. "You've compromised operational integrity." Another followed. "You've allowed personal sentiment to interfere with governance." Seo-Jin listened, and for the first time did not bow his head. They did not raise their voices. They did not need to. "This ends," the chairman said evenly. "Or so does your position." Seo-Jin understood what they were truly offering. Obedience in exchange for safety. As they spoke, Seo-Jin felt clarity, not confusion. This was not about Naledi alone. It was about control. They had never intended for him to feel anything at all. One board member leaned forward. "Is she worth it?" The room went still. Seo-Jin thought of Naledi's laugh. Her fearlessness. Her refusal to treat him like an object. "Yes," he said. The word landed like a fracture. When Seo-Jin returned to his suite, Naledi was gone. No struggle. No note. Just absence. And that absence roared. His phone was returned within minutes. It rang immediately. "Compliance was an option," the voice said. "You declined." Seo-Jin closed his eyes. "Bring her back," he said. The reply was calm. "Earn it." Something irreversible happened then. The man who had survived by restraint vanished. In his place stood someone sharpened by emotion rather than dulled by it. Seo-Jin did not panic. He calculated. He contacted every buried ally, every secret account, every contingency plan designed for enemies who underestimated him. If they believed love had weakened him, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Standing alone in the dim suite, Seo-Jin spoke aloud. "Not to the phone, not to the shadows. To touch what is mine," he said quietly, "is to invite destruction." Outside, the city glittered, unaware that a storm had just chosen its direction. Once the decision was made, events unfolded with ruthless precision. Seo-Jin did not move openly. He understood too well that visibility invited interference. Instead, he activated systems long forgotten, private security contracts, dormant surveillance channels, and legal triggers embedded years earlier under the guise of risk management. This was not desperation. This was preparation finally being used. Naledi awoke in a room stripped of warmth. No windows. No clock. Only light that never dimmed. Panic tried to rise, but she pressed it down. She had survived instability before. She focused on breathing, on remembering that fear fed control. If they wanted her broken, she would give them resistance instead. Seo-Jin's people moved quietly through Johannesburg. Not as aggressors, but as listeners. Drivers spoke. Hotel staff remembered faces. A security guard accepted a bribe he didn't realize was a test. Information surfaced the way it always does, through carelessness. Back in Seoul, the board celebrated too soon. They believed Seo-Jin had retreated inward, that isolation would make him compliant. Internal memos circulated, planning his replacement. They forgot something crucial. Seo-Jin had never been dangerous when obedient. Only when awakened. A warehouse outside the city, officially abandoned, unofficially owned by a shell corporation tied directly to the Kong Group. Seo-Jin stared at the satellite image. So this was how they hid their sins. One board member hesitated. Fear made him careless. Seo-Jin's call reached him at dawn. "I don't need loyalty," Seo-Jin said calmly. "I need truth." What followed was not confession but collapse. And with it came access. Naledi refused to cry. Even when threatened. Even when isolated. She answered questions with silence, with careful words stripped of vulnerability. What unsettled her captors most was not defiance. It was her certainty that Seo-Jin would come. A message arrived. "You have 12 hours. Seo-Jin didn't respond. Deadlines were weapons. And he had learned how to disarm them. Seo-Jin gathered his inner circle. Men and women who owed him not money but survival. "We do this cleanly," he said. "No casualties. No spectacle." Someone asked what would happen after. Seo-Jin met their eyes. After, there is no company. Alone again, Seo-Jin allowed himself a moment. He knew what this would cost. The legacy he inherited. The empire he expanded. The protection power once offered. Love had not softened him. It had clarified him. The warehouse fell without chaos. Power cut. Doors unlocked. Security neutralized. Not violently but efficiently. This was not a rescue built on rage. It was built on inevitability. Naledi heard footsteps. Not rushed. Not uncertain. When the door opened and she saw Seo-Jin, her breath left her body all at once. He said nothing. He didn't need to. They held each other. Not desperately but firmly, as if confirming reality. Naledi whispered, "I knew." Seo-Jin closed his eyes. "I won't let this happen again." Outside, sirens erupted. But not for Seo-Jin. Police flooded the area. International warrants activated. Documents leaked. Names exposed. The Kong Group's secrets were no longer buried. They were broadcast. Stock markets trembled. Executives vanished overnight. The chairman resigned in disgrace. The board that had ruled by fear found itself powerless in public view. Seo-Jin watched it all unfold without satisfaction. Only finality. Naledi waited for him to celebrate. Instead, he packed a single bag. "I can't follow you into that world again," she said quietly. Seo-Jin nodded. "I wouldn't ask you to." At a press conference streamed globally, Seo-Jin stood alone. He resigned. Not quietly. Not gracefully. But truthfully. He named corruption. He named manipulation. He named himself as both survivor and accomplice. When the cameras disappeared, so did the noise. Seo-Jin and Naledi sat together one last time. No promises. Only honesty. "I don't know who I am without the power," he admitted. Naledi reached for his hand. "Then now you get to find out." They parted not because love failed, but because it refused to be owned by circumstance. Naledi returned home. Seo-Jin vanished from public life. Both carried scars. Both carried truth. Months passed. The world forgot the scandal. But somewhere within the quiet of ordinary days, two lives reshaped themselves, no longer defined by control, secrecy, or fear. And the question lingered. Not whether they would meet again, but who they would be if they did. Life after power was unfamiliar to Seo-Jin. There were no assistants managing his hours, no meetings shaping the future of industries. Mornings arrived without urgency, evenings without expectation. At first, the silence felt like punishment. Then slowly it became space. Naledi returned to Johannesburg changed but unbroken. She moved into a smaller apartment, closer to the city's pulse. She resumed her work, this time with sharper clarity. Less compromise, more ownership. She had loved deeply. And survived it. News cycles devoured and discarded the Kong scandal. New villains replaced old ones. Markets stabilized. Memory faded. But some names lingered. Etched into court records, whispered in boardrooms. Seo-Jin was no longer one of them. There were nights Seo-Jin wrote messages he never sent. Words about gratitude. About regret. About how love had frightened him more than power ever did. He deleted them all. Some truths needed time before they could travel safely. The email arrived without warning. An international economic forum in Cape Town. A panel on ethical reconstruction after corporate collapse. Naledi's name sat quietly among the contributors. Seo-Jin stared at the screen for a long time. He could ignore it. Disappear further. But this time the decision felt different. This time he chose presence over avoidance. Cape Town greeted him without ceremony. No cameras. No escorts. Just wind off the ocean and streets alive with movement. For the first time he entered a city as a man, not a symbol. Naledi noticed him across the room. Older somehow. Softer around the edges. Not diminished, just human. She didn't wave. She waited. When they finally spoke, there were no apologies rehearsed. Seo-Jin said simply, "I didn't know how to be someone who stayed." Naledi nodded. "I didn't know how to be someone who waited." They walked together after the panel. No security. No scripts. Seo-Jin admitted the truth he had avoided for years. I wasn't incapable of love, he said. I was afraid it would cost me everything. Naledi smiled faintly. It did, she said. But it also gave you something back. For a moment silence threatened them again. Because choosing each other now meant choosing uncertainty. No empires. No protection. No guarantees. Just intent. Seo-Jin stopped walking. I can't offer you safety the way I once pretended to, he said. Naledi met his gaze. I don't want protection, she replied. I want honesty. They didn't rush. They didn't reclaim the past. They shared meals, stories, laughter that came easily now. The connection felt lighter, stronger. There was no dramatic confession. Just a moment, quiet and certain, where they both understood. This time the choice was mutual. Seo-Jin declined offers to return to power. Instead, he consulted quietly ethics, reform, accountability. Naledi expanded her work across borders. Their lives intersected, not merged. And that made all the difference. They never posed for cameras, never curated affection. Their intimacy lived in shared mornings and unspoken understanding. No spectacle, only presence. Sometimes Seo-Jin still dreamed of corridors filled with glass and steel. But he woke beside Naledi, and the dreams lost their hold. When challenges came, as they always do, they faced them without running. Not because love made things easy, but because fear no longer decided for them. Years later, the story would be simplified. A scandal, a fall, a romance. But only they knew the truth. It was never about rescue. It was about becoming. Some love stories are loud. Others burn quietly, reshaping everything they touch. This one didn't save the world. It saved two people from the cages they were taught to survive in, and taught them how to live instead.